Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third session of Athena. Very excited to be able to bring you Heather Poole from the Ministry of Justice, as she will be talking to you all about paired and mob programming. So yeah, without any kind of further ado, if you have any questions, ask them in the chat, but I will pass you over to Heather.
Hi. As I was introduced, my name is Heather Poole. Interesting things about me: I have a degree in games computing. I also have about 14.5 years as a civil servant. I have to make sure I update that every time I say that, or else I get stuck in saying 10 years. I used to be working for the HM Land Registry, and now I work for the MOJ. The great thing for working for the government for this period of time is that I've really seen how government departments have kind of gone more into a more digital and agile arena, where we have been like learning techniques that, well, have been around, have been relatively quite new to us, and it's been kind of exciting. I originally had a career in software testing. That was for a good solid 10 years, but I've now moved into software development in the past 4 years. I really love coffee, but unfortunately, I have to stick to decaf these days, or else my mind travels at light speed. My talk is a brief overview of paired and mob programming, why it's a good idea, misconceptions, pitfalls, and then onto the way of how to do it remotely with some software recommendations, and then the handy hints and tips at the end. So what is paired and mob programming? This is where two programmers work at the same workstation or computer. One person drives and the other person navigates, communicates, and talks with them about the code. Mod programming is just the same as this, but it's adding more people, and we're still keeping that driver navigator structure. On this note, it's usually best to keep the team reasonably small. I think my best experiences that I've had are working with a team of 4, but 3 to 5 seems a pretty good number. The drivers are the ones typing the code. Navigators are the one checking the code, thinking of alternative ways of doing something, and what to do next. The driver position is swapped amongst team members 10 to 20 minutes in a round-robin approach. There is another way of doing this, and it's called ping-ponging. This is great if you're following a test-driven development approach, where one person writes a failing test, and the next person then writes code to make the test go green. So why do it? I have quite a long list of things here, so I'm going to be trying succinct. With no more waiting for answers, immediate face-to-face collaboration allows us to ask clearer questions to each other and allows us to go back to the person quickly if we even don't understand the question. But the other way around, you can get that immediate answer, and once again, you get to explain that as well, allowing for further understanding. Basically, less time waiting for those answers, more time coding. You make decisions together, discussing them and able to bring up relevant data and information that other team members have, but also being able to kind of Google on the fly and also rereading user stories with a different mindset. More eyes on the code. This is a huge benefit for code quality. Picking up early mistakes means that you're almost having a code review as you go along, kind of cutting out that end step. Knowledge sharing. I learn hugely by watching people code and problem solve. When I started coding, I would often see developers take away tasks that seemed complex to me, and I would struggle to see how they would get to the moment that they were able to deal with these tasks. It almost felt like magic, especially when you would put in a code review, they would go through it and they would mystically kind of like help you come to an answer to an issue that you're having. However, working with them in pairs or mobs allow me to understand their thinking process, how what they Googled, and how they tackled particular issues using design patterns, or just simply kind of how methods and problem solving. However, what I also managed to get out of it was I was able to participate in that problem solving that seemed so unattainable at the start. I realized that my ideas also were contributed to solving the issue. Just because I thought I was new to the problem didn't mean I couldn't bring something that was useful. And often the new people bring fresh ideas to an issue that sometimes you forget after time. But not only after all that problem solving, I learned technical skills on the fly. My most recent experience is learning Kubernetes. It was it just really kind of really sank into my brain a lot quicker than it would have been going through the documentation by myself. And also, final bit to this knowledge sharing is it also has given me much needed confidence in using them. When working together, you get a more overall understanding of the system, makes you more flexible in what tasks you can do, and stops silos forming, which helps keep the team agile in what tasks they can pick up. Also, tasks that seem really kind of big, but at the same time you can't split up, we always seem to have them. If you kind of work together on something, it really kind of reduces that problem down. There are some misconceptions with paired mod programming. Or often enough, people will say, two people working on the same thing. That means you'll go 50% slower, right? This is something you definitely have to kind of work with your managers with to kind of like help prove otherwise. Um, because it's not so straightforward as that. While it is a little bit slower, it's a lot less than people expect, closer to around 50%, 15% slower. However, with that slow speed, you're bringing in other activities at the same time. So you don't have the code review kind of like issue at the end, the back and forth of maybe kind of code not being quite up to standard. Uh, Once again, you're reducing those silos. So you don't have to wait for someone to come off leave for a week. That another team member could help deal with the issue. The other misconception is that it's hard to do remotely. We have gone through some tough times within the past year, and a lot of our work has suddenly come from office space to working at home. Uh, Things were difficult at the start. People had to kind of figure out different ways of communicating and different software that can help it. But at the moment, we're really kind of starting to run with it, and it's not as difficult as we thought it was. The pitfalls that we do go into with pair and mod programming, especially when starting, is considering the makeup of your team. Um, we naturally have our introverts and we have our extroverts. One set of people are more kind of like interested in kind of figuring out a problem inside their head. The other type of person could be kind of like over talking people. So each side kind of needs to be a little bit self-aware. Our extroverts need to make sure that other team members are able to talk up, and also our introverts cannot be afraid to kind of speak up as well. However, this is a process of working through the team. What we also find is that there may be perceived difficulties around seniority. This is more something that could happen in an older kind of company structure, um, but people who are naturally kind of like more experienced, been there longer, or perceived higher grade, they need to be careful of not falling into a parent-child relationship and leading the paired or more programming. If it's a direct kind of like mentoring session, that's not so much of an issue. When working together, it's important not to kind of have too much of a kind of leader. It's also very important to have a safe work environment to make sure that people are not afraid to speak up, or not be worried about being ridiculed or simply not listened to. At this point, it's also very important to get buy-in from the team when paired or more programming. It's if one person doesn't really participate in this, um, it kind of brings down the kind of the overall experience for people. The only thing I could suggest here is if you're that person that's maybe not so kind of enthusiastic about it, just try it. Make sure that at least with the first couple of sessions that it's time boxed and you know what you want to get out of it. So you can at least see the benefits of the things that you want to improve. The other pitfall is that people don't actually realize how tiring pairing or more programming is. I find that these sessions really do achieve a lot because your mind's constant, but because your mind's constantly working, you're constantly kind of interacting with people mentally. It can kind of really kind of uh, take its toll. So there are definite things that you can do to work around that. So onto the section on how we do it online. I've got kind of two different methods that I'm going to talk through that I found that are pretty successful for my team. We use one particular one, but I've done the other sufficiently as well. Remote controlling and the Git handover method. Overall, though, the main aspects of paired and more program are going to stay the same. So we're going to keep the driver navigator and the timed people changes. So the Git handover method. You'll need access to Git or something similar, and everyone will need to have the code set up on their machine. So you have a team of 3 or 4. Each person will have to have the code that they're working on up and running on the machine. They'll need their ID up and running. They'll need access to get on this machine as well. As I mentioned, we will need access to Git. Whether this can be like something like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, you just need to agree where your code is being stored. You go through, you do your 10 to 20 minute session, and at each driver swap, code gets committed, checked in, and then checked out by the next driver. In particular, around this, also if your code commits are small, then consider at the end overall of doing a pull request into your main branch to squash, make sure you squash certain commits to make the history more readable and easier to manage. Also, you might find within that 10 or 20 minutes that you haven't written any code at all. So you kind of do just skip the whole checking in bit. Next is also you using a screen sharing software as well. With this is that when the person who's driving, they will share their screen to show what they are working on. Software recommendations. Basically, anything that allows screen sharing can be used in this, but some are just simply better. The ones that I have on the screen right now are pieces of software that I have had direct use of myself. There are absolutely loads out there. So really, just the main important things is readability and the quality of the screen sharing. So for example, you do not want fuzzy font on your screen. Once again, it's going to be tiring on the eyes. But also ease of access for the whole team. So, hey, if you're working on a company, you probably have like sets of software that you're used to using. But in a hackathon or something, you can have people with different experiences. So it's about getting that balance between free and easy to use to kind of like, oh, actually, this is really ideal for screen sharing a lot of text. In particular, you've got Slack. I've put on this as the easiest to kind of like use if any of you are working on Slack. It literally is kind of like slash chat, and it will bring up the chat, and it's easy enough to screen share. It's also got kind of cool things where you're able to scroll on the screen. But the only problem with Slack is that the screen sharing quality isn't the best, but it's useful in a pinch. Google Meet is the one that I most use myself. At least one person needs a Google account, but other people joining don't need that. The screenshot sharing quality is actually pretty good. And once again, it's one of those things that are slightly just like easier to use. The next one, Zoom, is probably been the most well known during the past year. Um, it is easy to use, and the screenshot sharing quality, once again, is actually really quite good. However, it's the majority of it's paid for. You can use meetings of up to about 40 minutes, I believe. Um, However, that really can be jarring when you're hoping to run a session for about 2 to 3 hours. Once again, Citrix WebEx is kind of in the same realm of this, where it is a paid for account. However, one person can be the paid person um, and can host conversations. The screen quality is excellent. Once again, it does a cool thing where you can share apps instead of just the whole screen, which is handy if your apps have got plenty of tabs in. But once again, this is only a small list of the ones that I have used. Um, and the world is your oyster. But once again, to reiterate, screen sharing quality, it really, really helps your eyes. And other things to consider like price and ease of access. The next method that I'm going to talk about is remote controlling. Basically, using software. Everyone, a host will share. Yeah, using software, a host will run the code on their machine, and then as well as sharing their screen, they will allow each person to take control of it when they have swapped over to driving. The great thing about this is one person has everything set up in the machine. Um, but the issue with this is that the driver does take control in each swap. Great thing is that you won't have the kind of the issues of just having to swap between get each time. So as the points shown here, it's quite simple. Person is driving for 10 to 20 minutes. They say, right, time is up, and what they do is they relinquish control to the next person, and as it goes on. My software recommendations are quite limited for this one. Having worked in with government kind of hardware and computers, I'm sometimes actually kind of a bit restricted to kind of who I can share the responsibility of working on my machine in. But the ones I've looked at are pretty good so far, and they are specifically gearing to bird mob programming. So this is definitely a burgeoning area in software. My first is a kind of a favorite of mine, which is Visual Studio Live Share. I'm a big user of Visual Studio Code myself, um, and it does require you to use that ID in particular. So it's not that great if people want to use IntelliJ or Atom or VS Code. Initially, it was a little bit awkward to set up, but once you kind of get over that, it's free. It hosts chats in terms of text and also kind of voice. And also you can kind of share all the tabs within it as well. And the great thing is that when the driver swaps over to this, is that they can just start typing away. Um, it's the best I can like equate it to is like Google Documents, where you have a number of people in the same document. The problem is that they can actually all start typing at the same time. So my only recommendation with this particular software is that you maintain a bit of a strict driver navigator thing, or else you can have about 3 or 4 people kind of going in and typing in on the same page or kind of other tabs, and it can get into a bit of a mosh pit of code. The next recommendation I have is Screen. This I actually used when doing an interview recently, and we did a paired programming coding exercise as part of the interview. This is available on screen.so, and is currently free due to this current world situation. But coming out of the pandemic, it could go back to a monthly cost. But looking at it, it's still pretty cheap for what it kind of like provides. Um, it was really easy to set up and use. I set it up on my Mac. The other person had it set up on Windows, and it just worked. Also, once again, you can draw on the screen, which it seems a little bit of a kind of like a side thing, but it's actually kind of pretty handy being able to kind of like draw a simple arrow what you're talking about because not everything has numbers by the side to tell me what line number I'm looking at. The next one is a bit of an odd one. It's called Tuple, available at tuple.app. Um, this is feels like quite a new bit of software that I have been using for paired coding and trialing with. It is paid for. It is only available on Mac. Um, and also it only supports paired programming, but it is starting to open towards mod programming. And the reason why I'm putting it on this list is that it's something to look out to. It might be suitable to you, and it's definitely worth trying out, and definitely something to keep an eye on in the future. So I feel that they're kind of really starting to kind of open up and really support paired and mod programming more. So, remote control versus Git handover. I've got all these bullet points here, but first of all, it really depends on your team. Why they have both the pros and cons versus each other. It's what's suitable that works for you. So for example, remote control, it's quicker to swap over. Not everyone needs that kind of that Git knowledge. So if you're kind of like got a team and you just want to get coding, and you have people of like different experience levels of various techniques, remote control is probably the way to go. And yeah, Git handover is the little slower with the due to having to commit code at the end of each swap. However, it means that if you're definitely kind of using Git and code version control, it's a really good way of making ensuring that you have small commits. Um, and also you can make sure that you have the kind of correct messaging and you then have a proper kind of rich history of how your code is developed over time. And also once you get into the rhythm of doing this, you kind of just you get used to it. It takes like half a minute to kind of end up doing that. With remote control, is that you have to allow someone to control your machine. As mentioned, if you're working on a machine that's maybe locked down, maybe you're using a company machine or a government machine, you might not have the capability of doing that. Hey, someone else can host it, brilliant. But you've got to kind of like consider being, allowing people that control over your machine. Cool thing with remote control is you only have the code set up on one person's machine. It's kind of a blessing and a curse, this. So, great thing. Only one person's machine needs a code set up. Um, it means that it's kind of a bottleneck if they're not there, though. If if you need to swap machine, you need to kind of get the code all set up. And that initial setup is sometimes a lot easier to do at the beginning when everyone's going through the same thing together. Um, as I said, I like to use the lottery theory. If someone win the lottery, would they be there the next day? Um, so if they can't possibly attend or something like that, it means that you don't have access to them as a host. With having a Git handover, everyone's code is on their machine, but then you have to set it up on everyone's machine, and you do have the problems where everyone has slightly different setup. But once again, looking at these pros and cons for each one is, you know, what kind of abilities that your team has and what kind of like software and hardware you have access to. So tips, setting tasks for each session. Um, At the moment, preference run a session for about 2 to 3 hours. We run this between about 4 people in our team. And it's very important for us to say, right, on this session, we are doing this. We follow a Scrum approach, so we usually pick up a card to do. But when you're doing a hackathon, there could be, oh, I'd like to set up this, we need to set up this API, or we need to kind of consider kind of putting together the initial design for our front end. Um, it allows you to kind of like stop digressing. For instance, if I don't have my speaker's notes, I will go off piste and babble on. If I have a goal, I will stay specific to that task and it gets done. I keep on reiterating this, but it's surprisingly tiring being the driver, so it's important to swap that role. Overall, kind of like this is quite tiring because you're doing a huge amount of work, a concentrated amount of work in this period of time. So as well as kind of sort of swapping that role, it is important to make sure that you take regular breaks. Um, Once again, it depends on each person in each team. It's good to have that conversation at the start, set people's expectations, and get your needs across to each other as well. Consider things like childcare, ability to concentrate on a certain amount of time. uh, I need definitely a break each hour, or else my mind does kind of go adrift. The time that each person is driving then is kept from a minimum of 10 minutes, but have seen times up to 20 minutes work. Um, Once again, it's important to keep track of time. So either someone or everyone have a timer somewhere, whether it's on your phone, whether you download an app, or something to help you keep track of this. It's important because we really get involved with our problem solving, and before you know it, it's half an hour, you haven't swapped, and you're still kind of talking about how to set up a pod for in Docker or Kubernetes. So, also, one kind of last point with this is ensuring a safe working environment. Um, it's really important to have allow everyone to have their say. One, it's going to benefit you if someone kind of comes up with this cool idea that you haven't considered. But for them to be able to do that, is that you've got to make sure that you don't deride for someone for maybe kind of like a slightly different kind of idea. Um, Make sure that you ensure that you listen to other people, um, listen actively to this. It's hard because there's so many things that you want to do to ensure a safe working environment. And it's just the best advice I can do is listen to people. Um, but yeah, definitely listen, and don't deride people for kind of like any of those different thoughts, because if someone quiets down, their good ideas are not going to help the team as a whole. So final bits. I'm naturally an introvert, and it's quite tough gonna go for these. But once you get me talking on them, I really do open up. And as I said earlier, I always have to make sure I keep my speaker's notes, or I do just go on and on. However, feel free to grab me on Twitter at Phoenix. Um, I love talking about this stuff, but also be warned, I just talk about computer games and all sorts of stuff as well. And I'd just really like to say thank you to our hosts, because it's been a really fantastic opportunity for me. And also thanks for listening to me.
Well, thank you, Heather. It's a topic that I am much more knowledgeable on now than I was half an hour ago, and yeah, hopefully everyone that's watching thinks the same too. If you have any questions for us for Heather, let us know in the chat as with the session earlier. We'll make sure all of them get asked. We've got obviously plenty of time for questions. We had one early on actually, so from Jessica around, is there anything you recommend doing or saying to someone to address if they're kind of leading the pair or mob session a bit too strongly? Obviously, you mentioned that there was kind of times where someone may be an introvert, as you mentioned, and someone else an extrovert. So is there anything you would kind of recommend saying if you're leading one of these sessions and they're coming on a bit too strong?
Um, the problem is making sure to not get a problem that you want someone to shut up, because everyone you want everyone to kind of participate, and sometimes it is that it's difficult for some people. I can talk over people quite easily, and I get excited about stuff, and it's just like learning to kind of to regulate that. So as well as kind of like trying to kind of just like, oh, thank you, like thank you, Heather. Hey, Maya, what do you think about this kind of situation? It's kind of like bringing them into the conversation by asking them their opinion on something. But also, it's not just about the feedback that you receive in these sessions, it's also outside and afterwards. Is that communication is always something that can be improved by the best of us. And you can do that by receiving feedback from people as well. So as well as trying to kind of bring in the quieter people is also kind of like feeding back on people like how they can kind of increase awareness, how long they may be talking for sometimes.
Awesome. Thank you. We're getting kind of a lot of positive feedback on the YouTube comments. I'd be glad to know. So yeah, everyone kind of finding it as insightful as me. There aren't too many questions, but I think I've kind of got one. I think if no one else does, and that's just around. You obviously gave everyone kind of loads of useful tips in terms of taking it into the hack or everyday life.
Mm.
Obviously, we want everyone to follow all of them and to take all of them on board. If there was just kind of one thing to highlight and one thing to take away, kind of like one major consideration, what do you think the most important aspect of those tips are?
Don't worry about doing it 100% of the time. Use these group kind of like coding sessions for the tasks where you want everyone to kind of be aware of what's being made here. So if you've got a central bit of software, that will affect how people do the front end or affect how they kind of like build the databases and stuff. It is pair and mob on that one. Um, and then that way, you can use that knowledge and they can be aware of like how the system works overall. Um, so you've got two things that are interacting. If they're aware of how something they're interacting with, they can code it more properly. Um, so uh, it can it's yeah, trying to find my words in this one. Um, so when somebody kind of goes off and does a task of doing the front end that needs to interact with an API, is that they know more or less how that API it works and what it's kind of expecting. You don't have any kind of surprises there, and then that way you don't have the problem where you're left kind of everyone's gone away and done their own tasks. They come back and now you've got to integrate that. It reduces that issue around integrating. So use kind of pair mob programming for kind of a big kind of those gnarly things at the center.
Amazing. Yeah, I think other than that, all I have to say is thank you very much. Like I said at the start, kind of I'm much more knowledgeable now than I was half an hour ago. So hopefully everyone listening has at least something to take away from that. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know on our Discord. Feel free to let Heather know. Obviously, you can kind of connect on Twitter and stuff. Keep an eye out for more talks, I'm sure, in the future from you, Heather. But in the meantime, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. If you haven't signed up for the hack, make sure you do. And we hope to see you on the WebEx with Cisco later on. See you later, everyone.